Where resources are limited, higher education will be seriously affected, and where we've seen some evidence of small but incremental progress in the last 5 years, especially in the African continent, higher education will be extremely hard put to ensure that those hard-won gains are never obliterated. It is indeed the case that many developing nations, especially in Africa, are dependent on development aid. During times of fiscal crisis, education in general and higher education in particular will be among the early casualties. This means that states will no longer subsidize higher education to the extent that they did in good times, and as such, essential services like technology, library resources, laboratories, research funding, as well as salaries for staff will all be squeezed. The result will be increased dropout rates, burgeoning unemployment, accelerated brain drain by academics and researchers of excellence. More seriously, nations under pressure will no longer be looking to their intellectual classes for creative solutions, and education may be in danger of being relegated to an unaffordable luxury. I believe in such circumstances, perhaps open distance learning comes to its own. It becomes a promising and practical strategy to address the challenge of widening access and increasing participation in higher education. In Africa, where resources are scarce and higher education provision is poor, ODL has been accepted as a viable, cost-effective means of expanding provision without costly outlay in infrastructure. Yet, even as governments in the developing world and a significant number of higher education institutions too delve into the possible benefits of open distance learning, they must always guard against the uncritical acceptance and implementation of ODL as the cheap way out. They must acknowledge the significant and serious challenges which have come to overcome its implementation, including financial resources, intellectual capital, some of which have been explored above. In Africa, therefore, we have to participate in this global economy in the best interest of our people. Quite probable that in an environment of fiscal crisis, states might be tempted to look to distance education as a soft option. It may suggest a probability of massification of education and training at minimal cost, and could allow the extension of higher education to the legions that were denied opportunities that are taken for granted in the development world. The problem, however, arises where the learners are unemployed and unable to afford the cost of education, even in the distance mode. Governments may resort to flooding open universities with unsuitable and undermotivated learners who may have no prospect of success in their studies. Distance education, as we've heard, is technology intensive. Many countries are battling to afford the cost of bandwidth, which would help leverage technology, which in turn has become essential for effective learning. Technology here means not just bandwidth as such, but the necessary hardware platforms, software processes and applications, including mobile telephony, necessary for effective student and academic management and learner support. Without competent and well-trained academics in the artifice of distance education, learning materials may not be revised regularly as they should. There could be a tendency perhaps to download open educational resources without critique or appropriate learning philosophy. And so a dose of healthy skepticism about one of ODL's latest fashion trends is surely not out of place in this company of scholars where received wisdom may be open to challenge and truth claims challenged through the test of verification. There is a suspicion in some quarters that open educational resources are dumped into open source sites when they become discontinued, or when registrations in such courses decline to unsustainable levels. The danger with this, of course, is that their intellectual value declines along with their relevance and quality. I do not believe that it would be remiss to suggest that more could be done with cheaper technologies like radio, mobile telephony, and other multimedia applications. A sober assessment of the value and potential of open educational resources without underestimating their potential, but while guarding against unjustifiable zeal, is surely called for. What is surely required is a genuine exchange of knowledge and interplay of ideas across all cultures and continents. Perhaps a code of conduct or guidelines to practice in OER should become our collective responsibility in order to ensure greater and equal participation and a balance of intellectual hegemonies. And yet there can be no denying that distance education could be the answer to many nations' social problems, in that the unemployed could be engaged in learning, entrepreneurs could grow and could secure the means of social upliftment, and universities could become the spaces of free engagement which could lift national morale by way of critical, creative, and innovative social and cultural activities. Distance education, properly conceived, could be the long-term strategy for national renaissance. I suggest that higher education, notwithstanding social circumstances, remains an engine for development. Let there be no mistake about the drive in Africa for access to education and to invest in education for sustainable development. It is notable that the participation rate in higher education in Africa remains the lowest compared to just about every other region in the world. The second decade of education in Africa was designed to build on the achievements of the first decade and capitalize on later developments like the MDGs adopted by the Millennium Summit in September 2000 and the Dakar Commitments of Education for All. The focus of distance education in Africa has shifted remarkably from mere assertion of desirability or seeking to make the case for distance education. A growing number of African states are in the process of establishing their own distance education institutions. What is at issue increasingly is what needs to be done to ensure that distance education is sustainable, is properly resourced, is of a standard and quality such as to deliver on what it promises. It is necessary to ensure that there are mechanisms for increasing access to higher education, while ensuring that learners enjoy an educational experience that would lead to sound learning, resulting in educational success. In other words, the reputation and utility of distance education has become a subject of much debate in Africa recently. Attention must be given to policy, regulatory, and organizational terms, to transportability of qualifications. In 2008, the African Council for Distance Education met and called in a stakeholders conference in Pretoria, South Africa. At that meeting, we sought to see how we can actually work together to provide a mechanism for accreditation and quality assurance, as well as to enhance cooperation among all distance education institutions in Africa. I'm glad to say that under the watchful eye of Professor Toli Mbwete, a collaboration unit has been established at the ICDE and led by Professor Olu Jagede, a quality assurance and accreditation unit based at the National Open University of Nigeria has now become established. I'm aware, therefore, that there are many initiatives all over the continent in Africa and elsewhere by colleagues in ODL institutions and in mixed-mode institutions in pursuit of all of these themes. Many of these will undoubtedly be reported at the conference in the course of our stay here. Finally, in the 5 minutes that I think I'm left with, I just want to say in conclusion, it is clear to me that educators are facing hard times. Perhaps now more than ever before, we are faced with the realization that if we hope to sustain ODL delivery in its current rates and grow it, we'll need to set aside our prejudices and our long-held them and us beliefs that have characterized relations between the developed and the developing world. We will have to look afresh at collaborations and partnerships that are meaningful and indeed that are affirming of all participants, preferably through the strategic lens that discourages fragmentation and piecemeal efforts and that encourages consolidation, cooperation, and mutual benefit. We shall have to implement more rigorous institutional planning and management, and we'll have to show far greater financial acumen in both our decision-making and in financial planning in the current fiscal climate. I believe that we have all begun that process. Thank you.